official, EJ.
I think we are live. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. We're really happy that you decided to spend some time with us today. We've got a really great presentation that we're going to talk about what's ahead in 2026. So we're going to look at trends, regulatory change, and what's ahead for data security. And with us today from PKWARE are EJ Pappas. He's the Field CTO Managing Director of Strategic Accounts. And we also have Glennon Andrews, who's the Divisional VP Business Development at PKWARE. So I will hand it over to Glennon and he will share the agenda.
Awesome. Thanks, Beth. Hello, everyone. Excited to get a chance to talk to you today. So thank you for joining us. We're going to start out by, we're going to be covering multiple compliance mandates today. So we're going to start out by talking about how we can go beyond actually just checking the box and using technology to be better data stewards. We're going to walk through some of the updates to HIPAA, FISMA, and CIRCIA, and some of the changes that you can expect this year and what we need to do to prepare for those. We're going to talk about some of the state-specific data privacy laws. We're probably all familiar with GDPR and what we have to do there. And in the US, each state is kind of on their own. So we're going to talk about some of those differences and how to prepare. We're going to go through the AI kind of landscape and how AI tools can be used and what the impact of those are and how that's changing data security right now. We're going to talk about why identity access controls aren't enough. We all know in most cases they are becoming mandatory. They're very, very important, but they're more of a starting point, than thinking that they're enough to protect data. So we're going to go into that. And we're going to talk about in general how we can go to being more data centric about cybersecurity and what we do to protect there. So EJ, I think I'm going to hand it over to you to get started and talk about the going beyond checking a box.
Sure. Thanks, Glennon, and hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. The purpose of this slide in the beginning of this presentation, we are going to talk, as Glennon said, about a series of regulations that we all know and that have been hardened in terms of requirements that are going into 2026. But the difference that we really need to talk about is how are they different and why are they different? And what we have seen in the industry in general is that compliance for so many years was a checkbox, was something that you would give to your operations team and say, do this thing, and then we are compliant, versus the challenge of having an audit start and having people go, show me where your data is, show me your processes, show me your policies, let that, let me better understand how you are handling data. So what we are seeing in general is much more data-centric controls that are taking place, and we're going to kind of see that as we talk about these various pieces of regulation. And the regulations and have told us or taught us now that this is not so much about the what. It's not so much about what we are protecting, it is how we are doing it. So this is the old example of the math question in elementary school where you had to turn over the page and show the work. Like this is very much a show your work kind of activity that we are dealing with now. And so the largest themes that you're going to see and that we're going to talk through are the first thing is you need to know your data. So having the ability to have discovery, automated discovery, if you can, allows you to know where your data is so that you can make informed decisions about putting policies in place that allow you to protect that information. So having visibility to your data, having data-centric thoughts around your data is the first step that we can all take in terms of having a better chance at being successful in terms of adhering to meeting your audit needs that you go forward with. The second question and the second challenge that exists is that once you find it, you've got to find a way to fix that data. And so fixing it for what we're seeing in these regulations, the concept of fix is encryption. So encryption becomes a method, both the traditional method of at rest, but also dealing with encryption in motion. So having a way of being able to encrypt your information as it is sitting inside of your environment or it is moving around your environment or leaving your environment is something that is vitally important to adhering to the rules that you have in place. And secondarily, being able to do that in a consistent way, in a policy-driven way, allows you to be able to tell your auditors and have an assurance that you're not worrying about Glennon making the right decision with his data, but you have a policy that says, as we send data outside of the organization, this policy takes place, this encryption action, this remediation takes hold. So having those two things are the most and the last piece of the puzzle that we're going to talk about and that you're going to see forward is the management platform for reporting and providing assurance across your platforms. So doing it the same way as much as you can, regardless of where you are, and having consistency provides assurance both to your auditors and to your organization. So reporting to your board to say, I know where the data is, I know how we protect it, and I can tell you and show that to you all the time, puts you in the best position to be successful and puts you in the best place to be able to adhere to the policies that you have going forward. So, Glennon, I think if we move forward into
Yeah.
HIPAA to start forward, we can kind of see how this lays out.
Yeah. And I think we're going to see a theme here, just because some of this covers what you just talked about. So I did want to just mention that there's a chat. So if you do have questions along the way, feel free to slow us down. EJ and I both like to talk. So feel free to throw an elbow in, and Beth and I will be watching that to make sure to answer those questions. But I think the biggest thing we're going to see, especially with HIPAA and through this presentation, is a lot of these rules are now becoming mandatory, where they may have been suggestions before for protecting PHI, best practices that we were notified of. So EJ mentioned encryption. That's going to be, again, important here. AES 256 as a minimum for data at rest, and the transport layer security for data in motion, making sure that's encrypted on both sides. The RSA 2048 plus, these keys, and it includes the hardware as well. But what we have to do, there's standards being laid out that are mandatory and minimum requirements for actually, encrypting this data. And we're going to see that evolve, especially as we get into quantum encryption in the next few years. I think they've also put in where it says cybersecurity provisions, some of these mandatory requirements for things like, again, multi-factor, looking at malware, and making sure that's up to date, making sure that all of your vulnerability management patches are coming through on a regular basis, making sure that we have incident response and IR teams that are testing and doing pen testing, but also making sure we have plans and backups for when these things happen. So there's just more rules within this that we're going to be seeing moving forward. And again, we're all have HIPAA data. I didn't even say what it was, but I think we all know what, PHI kind of healthcare data, the value of that in the market and on the black market, things like insurance fraud that happen when our data gets leaked. So this is why, it's very positive that they're putting these rules in place. And there's going to actually be teeth to these new compliance standards around HIPAA, where there's going to be fines. And I think, there's actually, in some cases, there could be criminal action if it's seen as negligent and where people purposely ignored these. So I think that's what we're really going to see as these move forward in the proposed date of May 2026. So at this point, I'm going to hand it back over to EJ, and we'll talk through some of the ways that we can make sure we check the box and go beyond that on these.
So I think what's interesting about that slide that Glennon was talking about is that there is so much rigor around tightening identity access and kind of updating your technical safeguards. So I think that we're talking about deploying MFA everywhere that ePHI exists within the world. We're talking about standardizing on privileged access management. They're invoking the words encryption when it came to at rest and in transit, and heightening your kind of security controls and rules. And so I see those those pieces and parts that are put in place. And really, what that is telling us is that we have to have a way of knowing what information adheres to the PHI, the EPHI standard that we're talking about. And so, again, here discovery becomes vitally important for us. It becomes important in terms of the transit. The data is that is moving around and leaving your organizations. It is very important in terms of what's sitting on disk. So we have always handled risk on disk, Glennon. How about that one? The way we've handled risk on disk with the candlestick in the study. No, I'm sorry, we're
You've
not there.
got the gist.
I got it. All right, sorry, I got carried away. Handling the concept of risk is with visibility. So knowing what information happens to exist wherever it is in your environment. And I think that the one piece that you also didn't talk about, Glennon, before is that all of these HIPAA rules now apply to the mainframe too. So here we have this lovely legacy piece of technology that is inside of our organizations that has been around there before Windows, and now all of the rules that are required for cloud repositories, all the data security and compliance rules adhere to the mainframe. So we have to understand what data exists. We have to understand whether it's in applications, whether it's sitting on disk, whether it's being moved around, how it's being moved around. The concept of using TLS doesn't solve the problem anymore in terms of that. So having visibility of your information is vital to be able to address your HIPAA changes. And once you have found that information and you have visibility, the second thing that everything says in those rules now is encrypt it. What is the answer? The answer is encryption. So we talk about there are a variety of remediations that exist within the world. Classification is always one of those things. We talk about masking, we talk about redaction, we talk about movement of data. The thing that all of these legislations are talking about now is the concept of encryption. So we are dealing with encryption of that information. So making sure that you have an automated, consistent way of being able to do that and being able to find the data and encrypt it is important. Being able to decrypt it and be able to notify auditors on what information you happen to have is equally important. So on this slide, the last box that we talk about is ensuring your ability to know what your policies are, having those policies extend to all of the platforms that you have within your organization, and then being able to report on those and provide assurance that what you've done is the same thing time and time again. Really is allowing you to be able to have some control and some strengthening in terms of both your governance, your technical controls, and your ability to provide oversight. So, Glennon?
Okay, great. We're going to move over to FISMA now, which is Federal Information Security Modernization Act. I had to read that because I never remember it. But I think one of the biggest things we're going to see this year that is interesting, and I think you can, thinking about our own data and, the way the federal government is involved in so many different industries and oversight that we can understand why this happens. But one of the biggest changes is it says annual assessments of security programs. But this is also a shift from the Office of Management and Budget, so kind of the executive office monitoring these things, to the Department of Homeland Security getting involved. So they're going to be able to do reviews and audit these security programs of these different federal agencies and also the contractors, private contractors that may deal with them. I think last year, if you think back to when the CrowdStrike happened, there was some kind of small manipulation of an update that happened. Somebody found that everybody got black screens. It shut down. We had people stranded in airports. Everyone was talking about cybersecurity. It was a really interesting week, but it did so much damage to these systems, showed our vulnerabilities. You can really understand why this makes a lot of sense for them to do that. We saw breaches with Microsoft and others as well. So one of the big things with FISMA is it's now going to be this, again, mandatory adherence to NIST. The 800, 171, and 53, one's basically going to monitor, or it's going to give the framework of how federal agencies should protect their data. The other is giving that same framework to private contractors as well, the ones that are working with this federal data. So that's a lot of times our personal data. Think about the IRS. They have our social security numbers, they have tax information, salary information, all this kind of what they call CUIs, controlled unclassified information. But all of that floats around. So you're just seeing more stringent rules and these mandatory requirements of how they need to protect it. We're also seeing continuous cybersecurity monitoring. So, where there may have been audits in the past where they run through a checklist one time to prove, that they don't have anything out, that's not really going to, it's not going to do it anymore. We need to be able to show where we have classification, where our most vulnerable data is. We need to have inventory of the systems that store that data. And again, making sure that they're up to date with patches and things. And all of that needs to be monitored to make sure that it's safe. We're also seeing this adoption of the zero trust architecture, which, there's a lot within that. There's multiple pillars at PKWARE. We've always focused more on the data pillar, but there's also user identities and things that, go into access and control. There's also device inventories, which I just mentioned, and network security, other pieces of that, but all of it comes together to give this nice framework that isn't just suggestions anymore, but really it's going to be requirements of how to protect our data. So I think the FISMA updates are required by the end of September, which is the federal year end. So that's what we'll see it. So I wanted to hand it over to EJ just to talk about how we can get ready for these and what we should do.
Thanks, Glennon. The the FISMA updates, boy, this is a weird sentence. The FISMA updates are my favorite updates of the governance that we're seeing out there today. And they're my favorite because they really fall into three buckets. They fall into the concept of implementing zero trust across the board, providing automation and visibility to your organization, and providing better POAM kind of controls, the ability to document vulnerabilities, to accept risks, to close open issues, and the like. So it is a discovery and classification mantra. So zero trust, the perfect part about zero trust is it says that you need to know where it is, you need to know what you're doing with it, and you need to encrypt it if you haven't been able to do it. It is the simplest. We talk about NIST adherence. It's such a elegant and simple way to be able to solve a problem. And the FISMA folks have simply said that is what you have to do now. So it's no longer, we think this is a good idea. You might be able to administer or have your needs addressed by doing it. They're saying these are what the controls are. So it is operating at zero trust means that you've mapped all of your data pillars within your federal controls to the zero trust model set. So it is giving you the control over that information and what you happen to be. It is delivering automated kind of GRC policy to the pieces and parts that you have, and it gives you the ability to have that information. And as the slide says, and again, one of the things I love so much is that it extends these controls not only to your SaaS environment, but to your partners too. So your partners, your SaaS, and your contractors all have the same controls or the same obligation that you have. So knowing what your data is, having control of that data, and making sure that it is encrypted by default is the underpinnings of this legislation, and it really allows you to have a simple set of controls, and it should, in theory, make your audits easier because it is telling you exactly what it is that you need to do. There isn't a lot of ambiguity in terms of what this happens to be. Tighten identity access, use MFA, encrypt the data that you have, and have visibility based on the data where it happens to be and being held. So ensuring that you follow that simple tenet that we talked about before, which is discovery, protections, and reporting, I think that you're well on your way to having some success with FISMA. Fun?
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think it's you mentioned the mainframe earlier, and I think about the SaaS environments, the clouds, and how the data is everywhere. It's a big step to be able to inventory this. So I like CIRCIA. This is one that's interesting for me if we're talking about our favorite compliance, EJ. Um, but I think so because it's the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. And what this essentially means is, I think it probably has been around longer, but I think back to the 5 years ago with the Colonial Pipeline breach that shut down oil and gas in the Southeast. And now, this week, I had to run to the grocery store this morning to get a gallon of milk, and the aisles were cleared out as people are in the South. EJ, this doesn't happen in Boston, but in the South, when there's the threat of a snowstorm that there is this week, everybody runs out and buys everything they might need for 6 months, and there's not enough on the shelves. But it makes me think about this and how it applies to critical infrastructure, because we have seen where these breaches, like I mentioned with the CrowdStrike hack, that shut down transportation, it shut down other fields, and just showed that vulnerability. So now these rules are in place with critical infrastructure to protect some of these. So it says it at the bottom, but it impacts around 300,000 entities. And the ones those are, going to be energy, oil and gas companies, hospitals, transportation companies, agriculture, food, and financial services. The industries that keep America moving. So that's what these rules apply to. So for critical infrastructure, one of the first things we're going to see is they have to notify CISA, which is the cybersecurity and infrastructure agency, the cybersecurity agency that are monitoring these kind of things. They have to notify them with 72 hours of any cybersecurity incident. So that way, again, there's time to prepare. This isn't something they get to wait and come up with a PR story for 3 months to make it not sound as bad. There has to be urgency to this before there's a fallout that can impact more people. And they also have to notify within 24 hours of making a ransomware payment. And then CISA is able to notify Department of Homeland Security. So again, these are all interconnected, but they can notify them if necessary. So other things can happen. And sometimes, they don't even allow them to make ransomware payments, depending on what that might mean. So we're going to see that. And I think one of the big things is just expansive record keeping. I know I sometimes look at the site for healthcare where you can see all of the data breaches, impacting that by state. And it's really interesting, but we're just going to be seeing more of that record keeping and making sure that there's more notice, especially for individuals, because our information might be compromised. We're going to see that fines and then even these civil penalties can come in if there is negligence and we're not actually showing that we're being good data stewards and protecting data. So we're going to see all of those types of things more and more in the future. And this rule is expected in May 2026. So EJ, again, back to you to talk about how we can prep.
We'll do that one. Thank you, Glennon. I think that the first piece of we talk about solution, I think that it's the reminder that this is all about incident reporting. Like the whole goal and objective of this particular act is about ensuring that you are reporting your information, A, when you should, B, in the most effective way, and that you are kind of allowing yourself the ability to be successful, if you will. So I think that in the first, when I think about preparedness and the way that you should be able to deliver solutions, the first thing that I would talk about is your ability to clarify the applicability of this stuff and the roles that you happen to have. So just being able to first lay out what organization you have, how it fits, what you're doing to be able to go forward and to be able to deal with it. Secondarily, applying a particular playbook. So as the first bullet that we have on the slide talks about reducing the impact of any of those breaches by identifying data and taking action against it. So having a playbook of saying, when I find something, deal with it in a particular way, take a particular set of actions against it, and make sure you can be able to do the things that are there. The other two things that are a part of this, and then I'm going to kind of talk about how you can kind of deal with risk, is that, one, we talked about the applicability of it. Secondly, we talked about having a playbook, having an incident playbook that you can kind of address and deal with. The third one is plugging into existing regulatory reporting regimes. So is it a HIPAA breach? Is it a GLPA breach? Where does your breach come from? Follow along the same path that you've done that information before, and then be ready for it so that you can do it in a timely manner. One of the things that Glennon had on that other slide was the 72-hour, the magic times of being able to report faster and have this information out and ready. So you need to be ready about being able to do that. If you are ready, if you know that this stuff applies to you, what do you have to deal with? How do you deal with it? One of the simplest things that we talk about is the reduction of your footprint, of making sure that you're holding the data, only holding the data that you are supposed to be holding in the most effective way. So when I read the CIRCIA policies that the suggestions and regulatory updates that they've had, one of the things that screamed to me was data retention. So we were thinking about data retention, and certainly when you have data in your environment, you want to be able to mask anything that is in a lower environment or anything that is going to be handled by your AI engines. And we'll talk more about AI going forward, but you want to be able to handle that stuff, but only holding the data that you need to have. Um, I had a customer tell me one time that, the thing about data retention, he says that, everybody thinks that their data is the most valuable piece of information in the world and they have to hang on to it. And data doesn't age like fine wine. Data ages like milk, right? So it gets old fast, it gets bad fast, and then it affects the rest of your refrigerator, and you've got to do wholesale changes to the way that you're holding on to information. So adhering to retention policies, understanding what those happen to be, 3, 5, 7, and 10 are the magic numbers that we deal with in terms of retention all the time. So knowing if you have to have your data, ensuring that that data has been um, classified or bucketized to say, no, it doesn't have to be held any longer, then you should get rid of it because you can never have a breach on deleted data. That's just a simple fact. So if the data isn't there, you don't have to worry about it going. So having good data discovery and visibility hygiene lets you know what information you happen to have in your environment. Having that information classified in a way that you know that you can segment it out. Is it something that is worthy of reporting or not? If you are holding that data, if you can mask it, then you should do that. And if you don't have to hold that data, then you should get rid of that. So reducing the impact of any type of breaches means having better data hygiene. And then if you are reporting, make sure that you are following the appropriate guidelines to get that data out to your organization as quickly as possible. Whew, that was a mouthful.
Hey, you got through it. We are hoarders by nature, so those retention rules are very important for us to have. So
That is correct.
I think we all want to hang on to it. All right, I'm going to move on to state-specific regulations, and I think EJ is going to talk through some of the specific states at the bottom. But I just wanted to say, we're probably mostly all familiar with these because we have global privacy laws that we've been dealing with. I think GDPR has been around for nearly a decade, and that's great because the entire continent came together and came up with specific rules that they all agreed to. And most of the rest of the world, we don't have that luxury. That Canada is, each province sort of has different rules, and Quebec came up with new ones a year or two ago. We see that in Africa now, that there's new rules. China has their own, and now in the U.S. Each state's kind of governing this themselves. California's definitely been the forerunner and coming out with these rules. And I think that what I've heard from their new privacy rules are they're going to be more strict than GDPR, which is great because a lot of the companies that house a lot of our sensitive data are, live or are headquartered in Silicon Valley. So it's important for them to have those rules. But I think if you look at them, there's going to be small changes between them, but a lot of the same requirements around protecting the data and how we deal with them. So EJ, if you can take a minute to run through these, I think that might be a good idea.
Sure. Yeah, you were talking about Law 25 and PIPEDA in Canada. I think that is a good example of what we see in the States. So there is no across the board GDPR type of legislation that's there, but I think most people point to CCPA, the California Act, Privacy Act, as being the most onerous, the most restrictive in terms of the ones that are there, but there is an enormous amount of Me Too type of legislation, privacy legislation that's gone across the board. New York has had theirs for a long time, the DFS 500 stuff that has been in place. Massachusetts has had laws, Texas has had laws. The ones that we're talking about here that are new in 20 and 26 are Kentucky and Indiana. The Kentucky and Indiana ones are, they don't have as much teeth as the ones in California, but they do provide particulars around state control and what you need to hold on to and and how you should provide and how you can be able to provide those provisions to the organization. Rhode Island is interesting in the fact that they have provided particular protections for children, and I think that that is going to be one of those that is going to circle back to the rest of the privacy, the one-off state privacy laws, because providing particular adherence to privacy for children is such a difficult task right now with TikTok and with social media being what it is. Your right to turn over your information is the first click within the acceptance of the app. So the moment that you accept those apps and and your kids put them on their phones, all of their privacy is gone. So the machines will mine your iPhone for anything that's there. If you've ever read the TikTok terms of service, it is probably one of the most frightening pieces of information that I've ever read. It says any machine that you're signed into, it has the right to be able to scan. It has anything that you have connection to, you have the right to scan. It has anything that is on the network that you're connected to. It is completely invasive of the information that you have. And everybody kind of now nonchalants and say, well, privacy, everybody has our information. We don't have to worry about it. It is very, very difficult for you to keep track of what that information is. And these laws simply say, you have to tell us. You have to tell us what you know about me and have that reporting happen in a way that is consistent and effective and easy for you to be able to do. I can find that button on the homepage and press that homepage and get the results that I need to be able to have and be able to deal with going forward. The last thing I'm going to say about this slide that I think is really just important for us all to take internalizing is that we're talking about we likened this to GDPR, and we talked about CCPA being the one that has the most restrictive requirements and the most heavy penalties that are there. 19 states have privacy laws that are in place, right? So we are talking about nearly half the union, and we are talking about the fact that that's only going to grow. So it's not going to become less restrictive, it's going to become more restrictive. And those laws mean that we have to be able to take good care of the information that we have, and that the people that are holding our data have to be good stewards of that data. So this is actually a good thing, I think, for consumers. And it just means that you should have some level of confidence and don't be afraid to press the button. I think, Glennon, you remember you having a story about asking for data from some particular organization and getting a document that very much felt like a human being had to do the work themselves to gather the information that you needed to deliver the results that you have. So it's good that these laws are in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think back, and what that reminded me of is when I had gotten a mortgage, and then you get all the information for what's public knowledge, and other companies say we can give you a lower mortgage, or here insurance companies are following, and it's like our data is out there, and I'm a very big fan of opting out and utilizing those. But I think a lot of people, you feel small in a big world of technology, and you're like, how does my information really matter? What are they going to do? But having worked in cybersecurity as long as we have, you get a little paranoid because you figure out how they do. And I think that flows right into this topic of AI and how it's used. That I feel like every time I get on social media now, which is much less than I used to, you get reminded of how your personal information is being used, because you suddenly have advertisements that are popping up because they know what your interests are, they know your shopping habits. I listed a movie that I was a fan of 15 years ago on Facebook, and then suddenly I see clips from that movie popping up all the time. But it's like they know as much about us as we know about ourselves. So I think that's what's scary about what's happening with AI is, I'm also reminded when I get on social media that I see it on LinkedIn and other places where they're like, you can create a bot in 15 minutes that will help manage your calendar. It'll do this particular part of your job. And it says it can do your job better than you can and more efficiently. And it's, the idea of that is that's how easy it is to create these bots now. And we're just going to see more and more of those in the world. So I think from a more serious note, it's the concern of how those can be used against us. And that's where this says, for social engineering, spear phishing, and deep fakes. I think back to the days of old that, you would get an email that had misspellings in it. It had bad grammar, and it would say, you had a great aunt that passed away and you've inherited this money. And I assume if you replied to that message, they'd ask for your social security number or your bank account numbers and routing numbers. But the idea is like those were pretty easy to spot. But now with this proliferation of AI and how sophisticated these attacks are, this is what is actually really scary that they can have these really complex emails that understand what our companies do. They understand our relationship with our coworkers, and so they're way more targeted and believable. You also have the deep fake stories are kind of terrifying to hear where EJ and I are recording our voices right now in this webinar, our nuances, my hand gestures, whatever that is, and those things can be used against us to create deep fake videos that could call into our help desk or could create a video to say anything. So it is pretty scary. So I think the whole thing is just being more vigilant right now, slowing down a bit and taking time to realize, what those attacks could be and what the implications are if you click on a link sometime in these emails. So it's just, and then as far as data is concerned, protecting that, we have to, as companies, to protect the reputation of our organizations, we have to understand what sensitive data we have, where that lives, and make sure we're doing a better job of creating it. And then, as EJ has mentioned multiple times through this presentation, creating these controls that limit how data can be used, how it's shared, making sure that it's encrypted at rest and in transit, and what people can do with it is just so important as these kind of potential breaches happen from AI. So EJ, I'll hand it to you just to maybe go a little bit deeper into another AI use case.
Sure. I think that when we think about AI, number one, every product that you buy talks about their AI. Every movie that you watch talks about the AI. Everything that you're doing, AI has become an integral part or a necessary part or an obligatory part of the conversation that you're having. And so the in the good old days, when we talked about enterprise organizations 25 years ago bought DLP products so that they could keep the information that they had at bay on the data that was inside leaving or the data that was outside coming in, and had protections that were put in place. The two stories that we're telling here deal with this in the same way. So the story that Glennon was just talking about was the concept of people or bad actors utilizing AI to build the most sophisticated emails or threats that are coming into our organization. So it an email that comes from your boss that asks you to do a thing, um, people always respond to those kinds of actions or emails that come in from the group that you're working on or the team that you're working on or whatever that is. The the more that those can be spoofed, the more that information becomes not the information. The more the phone call that you get that sounds like your boss who's telling you to do something, um, those are real threats. That means that, all of us have used AI to rewrite an email to make it sound better, or to build a graphic for a presentation or for our kids or for something else that we're using. Those tools are being used to spoof us. to be able to get after the information. So that is that front end that Glennon's talking about. It is really important for you to know where your sensitive data is, make sure that it is protected so that it cannot be lost. The that's a keeping the good stuff away from the bad guys story. The story that I'm talking about is actually us giving the good stuff to the bad guys. It's the opposite of that information. And so we all have AI engines, and we're all taught that you should be very careful about what information you give to it and don't allow it to have the information that it should have this or that or the other thing. Well, clean data before, what is the one of the things that we talk about? Mask and de-identify information that is in your production environment so that it can't be prevented, so it can't be exposed. Cleanse the LLM data before it is doing insight. So we're giving you this lovely piece of data that everybody in the world can kind of give you. What does that really mean? That means I talked about retention when I was talking about CIRCIA. On your hard drive, you probably have a directory that has got presentations that you built 5 years ago and 7 years ago and 10 years ago for a customer that you were doing something or other that's got sensitive information in it. You probably have a download that you took from Salesforce that's in your downloads folder that's a CSV file that you converted to an Excel file that you've got in a protected location, but that CSV file still exists on your local machine. You pump that information. You go um, to your LLM right now, and you go to Copilot and you say, here is the directory where my presentations are. Go read those presentations and build me the best new presentation for this particular customer. It's taking all of that information. It's taking the payroll information. It's taking your org charts. It's taking the other sensitive data. We're not worried about credit cards here. We're worried about IP of your organization that you're leaving and sending to somebody else. I sent this email to the chief data officer of this company, and this is what I asked about. All that information is getting consumed into the LLM. And unfortunately, for many of us, we don't have the luxury of having our own private LLM that we're working for our own company, but we're farming that up into um, into ChatGPT, into Claude, into whatever engines that you happen to be using, Perplexity. They're throwing that information up, and it's learning who you are, and it's learning what your information happens to be. So we have to be vigilant about protecting that information and protecting it. Obfuscation, a lovely word that has a B and an F right next to it. So how many words can you use that have a B and an F next to it? So obfuscation is a word that you need to use and be comfortable with in your organizations. You need to be able to take that information that is important and not share that because it is unnecessary to have some of the data that we are sharing with our engines to make our information better. So not only is this me and Glennon talking to you about this, the EU has an AI Act that's already been put in place that says this kind of information cannot be sent. There are AI regulations that are being put in place over and over again. We talked about privacy regulations that are going at the state level. The federal government is worrying about AI, and there is legislation that is happening there because this is probably the most important thing that we can be able to deal with in terms of protecting our information. So vigilance, not only what is coming into us, but vigilance in what we are sending out are the most important pieces that I would tell you about AI today.
Yeah,
Gun?
totally agree, EJ. Well, and I think this leads us into our next slide where we're going to talk a little bit about identity and access. And I think thinking of a couple of the themes we've talked about, EJ mentioned retention. I think I even called myself a data hoarder, and I think a lot of us are. And we always think of this identity and access, and I think the second bullet talks about the keys to the front door. But I think what changes when you talk about retention and you talk about the complexity of modern organizations is it's not just a key to the front door. If you think about your house and where you have things, it's your front door, your back door, your garage doors. You have an attic. You may have a shed in the backyard. You may have an off-site storage unit. So identity and access is absolutely important, but you still have to know where this data lives. You have to have there's a lot more to managing it. So EJ, I don't know if you want to take this slide and kind of build upon that.
Sure. I think that identity and access management is extremely important, and all organizations should be worrying about it. There are products that exist in this marketplace, in the data marketplace, that are marketed towards cleaning up your access controls, cleaning up your privileges, cleaning up the the access to the file servers and to the cloud repositories that you have in place. And that is important information to have. However, there are these little things called MCP servers, Model Context Protocol servers. And those MCP servers, which exist now all the time, anybody that's using Claude to generate code in their environment has the ability to build an MCP server, and you can start querying various resources in your own environment, querying access control, asking it normal questions. Hi, where is the most sensitive data in my organization, and where are my privileges the least? You can do those kinds of things, and you're going to get responses back from those particular services. The problem that exists all the time now is that access control is the bouncer at the front door of the bar. So if it is big and strong and powerful and scary and shows a lot of rigor, and you can't come in because you don't have the right clothes on, or you can't come in because you look like you've been overserved somewhere else, or whatever that happens to be, that's great. But the moment somebody gets in and starts navigating around the rooms, they can go anywhere they want inside of the house. They can go to various subdirectories into the file server. They can go to various areas that happen to exist. And what that means is that you need to be able to lock down the information itself. Having data-centric securities and data-centric protection is much more vital to your success and equally important to any of the access control rules and stipulations that you've talked about from before. So we don't want to allow people to get into our environments, certainly, but we want to ensure that if they get in, they can't get in to the bedroom where the jewelry happens to be. They can't get into where your china is being served. They can't get into the safe that keeps the other information that exists within your organization. So
Hey,
access control is the start. It is not the finish. It should be the beginning and not the end.
yeah,
Yeah.
EJ, I want to make sure we did get a question here. And I think there was another slide that was a solution slide for this one, so I'm sorry if I passed it off a little early. But our
That's all right.
question is, for a company that treats identity and access controls as the last line of defense today, what is the most practical next step to move beyond that mindset without ripping and replacing what they already have?
Yeah, I think you should implement data-centric controls on top of the IAC stuff that you have. So data-centric controls means, kind of as the theme that we've been dealing with inside of this presentation, is discovery and visibility, knowing where your sensitive data happens to be, encrypting the data that is the most important, encrypting it for the particular user or group that you have. So the finance team alone should be able to have access to particular files, or members of the finance team should have access to those files. And if the data is important, but it is not necessary to have that sensitive data, then you should implement things like redaction and masking to be able to do it. So data-centric controls on top of identity controls provide you kind of that perfect mix and balance of ensuring that if people are in, they're only seeing what they should see. And more importantly, if that data is being exfiltrated, it is no longer useful to anybody else that's having access to it.
Yeah, you should know your data like you know your identities, to where you can have different groups have different access to different files. You should be able to do the same thing based on the sensitivity of that data. So, and how it's being used. So, Beth, I think we can skip forward from this slide. And EJ, I don't know if you have anything else to say here, or if you already have.
The only other thing I would say to this, and I'm sorry I did talk, I got excited about it, Glenn. So apologies in terms of it, is we've been talking a lot about encryption just in general, and talks of ways of going forward. I would just say the last piece of this is quantum. When we talk about quantum algorithms within our encryption data, you should make sure that you are either using quantum ready algorithms, since they're not standardized, or we're still continuing to deal with standardization, knowing that you need to have the ability to identify where your weak algorithms are so that you can address those. So discovery of sensitive data doesn't just mean I discovered that there was a credit card or a social security number. It could mean that I'm using a particular algorithm to protect that data. Is it a DES algorithm? Is it, AES 256? What are we doing so that we can make sure that we can update those when necessary so that if that data is stolen, they can be protected. They won't be able to be broken easily, and that the data can remain protected for as long as it possibly can. That'd be the only other point I'd make.
Awesome. Well, I think as we go forward, we've got this last slide, but I did want to remind everybody, feel free to submit additional questions. We appreciate that last one. Do you want to take this slide or do you want me to, EJ?
Um, well, why don't you do it, Glenn? I've talked
Okay.
an awful lot, so
You
that's
have, and I think you've said some of this. So I think this is kind of a recap in some ways. But as we talked about, that first slide we mentioned, and EJ talked about how we move beyond just a checkbox to being audit ready, to being better data stewards. And that's where I think this data centric approach matters. Is the technology is caught up where you can discover where this sensitive data is. You can get to know it better. You can know it on users' computers where it's, a lot of times we didn't know before, or as it moves to file servers or SharePoint and OneDrive, we can keep a better idea on what that data is, where it moves, and classify the data in certain ways where we can see that and make sure we put different protections based on what that data contains. So that's applying the appropriate protection. EJ just mentioned that, masking or de-identifying data that would be in lower environments that maybe certain engineers would have access to, or if it is going into AI models, keep the value of the data by having demographic information. You could know if it is a hospital, you could know certain diseases, certain age ranges, but you don't have to have that specific patient's information. You don't have to have their insurance numbers or billing information caught into that. And I think as we all work with, the pace of the world is just moving so much faster. If a leader says, hey, make a copy of this database, put it over here so I can do something, the DBA is just going to do it. They're not necessarily thinking about in that moment. If they're like, I need this for the board report tomorrow, they're not going to think about the implications of what's in that data and what the security risk could be because of that. So I think that's just where we need to have a reminder of to go back and delete it the next day. They may forget. We find that all the time with replicated data sets. But I think by doing something proactive, like masking or redacting that information or keeping it encrypted, depending on where it goes, is just going to help do it. We definitely believe in centralized policies. Don't put the work on end users to make decisions around protecting data. Having centralized policies that do that for you is just going to be consistency and then ease of scalability in being able to do that. So again, the technology exists, and then being able to keep this in an always on kind of fashion. So as the files are downloaded, as they're created and a save as function happens, being able to apply that in that immediate moment is going to be the best way to do this to understand our data and be able to help there. I think that's it for this slide, unless you have anything else to add, EJ. Otherwise, we'll take it over to the Q&A. And I see we just got another question. So across HIPAA updates, state privacy laws, and CIRCIA, are you seeing a shift from secure the environment toward proof control over the data? And what does that change first in a real program? Do you want to take that, EJ?
Sure. Yes. How's that? Yes, I am seeing that unequivocally. I think that there is uh, a very pronounced and specific move towards data centricity in terms of the types of legislations that you're putting in place. So I think that that movement and it's not a movement away from the targets per se. It is the fact that it is now what is living on those targets that is becoming in play. I think that regulation started before as have you protected this environment to now what are you protecting on this environment? So it's just a little bit of a nuance to it. So I think that the first step in the update of this is discovery. I really do. I think that visibility of the data is your first win, and you should find a way of being able to address as many of those targeted areas with the same product that you can, because you have limited people. The one resource that is not um, that is finite in your organization is the number of people that you have. So I would say that you have um, using one product to be able to search as many platforms as you can gives you that first step in the story, which is knowing where your sensitive data happens to be, knowing where it lives, and then allowing you to make better decisions around protection and also better decisions around what policies look like. So, how should we handle it? Where do we use encryption? Where do we redact? How do I adhere to um, retention policies and those types of activities? So that I would think that data visibility, data discovery is probably your next step in terms of augmenting your journey.
Great. That kind of plays into this, but another question came in on what's the biggest gap you see in compliance readiness? Is it actually finding the data, classifying it, or enforcing protection consistently after it's found?
Um, I think that the Well, I think that finding is a challenge because I think that people have um, asked for outs on particular platforms. So mainframe notoriously is the data is encrypted at rest. We use encrypted pipe to get data off of it. Therefore, we shouldn't have to worry about what's on it. But as those platforms are being modernized, that the data becomes very, very significant and exposed. So I think that discovery is really super important and one that exists. But I do think that in the nature of the question that you just asked, I think that having consistency in protection, having uniformity in the way that you are protecting data, to say we're going to encrypt the data wherever it is in the same way, really provides kind of revelatory for you because you know that there isn't a negotiation that's happening. It isn't this data I'm only going to classify. I'm classifying it as restricted, therefore I don't have to encrypt it. This data it's going into a lower environment, so I'm only going to mask it, so I don't have to worry about it. This data will be encrypted. Having multiple decisions to have to deal with is hard for you to have to keep track of. So I would think that of those choices that you gave me, I think that the challenge of knowing where the data is in the first place is always the challenge. But once you have decided what you have, I think having consistency around the way you're protecting it is important.
Yeah, I agree. I think organizations are afraid. We work with a lot of companies that obviously there's selling involved at some side, and they're all afraid to break the workflows and break the usability of the data. I think that's personally where PKWARE comes in and it's designed our platform to not do that. But that's one of the hardest things. And I think classifying is easy because yeah, you're putting some kind of challenge or change to that to identify it. But classification in some ways without protection could lead to people being able to identify a threat actor being able to identify what the valuable things are. I've also heard some organizations talk about, classification again being a suggestion that it's, if it's user controlled for them saying internal use only, but then they need to send that externally, what's to stop them from changing the classification label if it's not actually, the classification is not applied based on the contents of the file. So I think in my opinion, I think it's the protection, as EJ said. I'd agree with that as well.
I'm going to just
Hopefully
give one.
that's, yeah,
Yeah,
go
I'm going to
ahead.
give you one more point on that one, Glennon, is that if you are a bad actor, if you're a threat to an organization and you are infiltrating an organization to find sensitive data, one of the easiest things to do is look for all the data that has been labeled restricted or confidential and find that data and then find a user's access who could have the ability to read those labels. That is that I've basically built a map to tell me where all my sensitive data happens to be. If that map leads to encrypted content, then the user has or the bad actor has a second threat that they have to deal with and having to decrypt that information. So classification basically is just a big neon sign that's telling people where the good information is or the good stuff that they want to be able to go after is.
All right. Well, I appreciate so many people sticking with us through the webinar today. We'll definitely send a copy of this recording out. And if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to engage and talk about these topics, as hopefully EJ and I prove that we both find them very interesting. And it's fun to chat and have a conversation about this. So thank you all again for joining today, and please let us know if we can be of additional service or value. We appreciate you joining.
Thanks, folks.